Good evening, everybody. My name is Dan Fishman. I am the Executive Director for People for Liberty, and you are here for our Martin Luther King Day broadcast. A lot of times, there's a lot of broadcasts, a lot of talk on Martin Luther King Day about civil rights and about events, and not necessarily a lot of talk about the man and the impact that he's had on us. And so I thought it would be nice to have a conversation where we talked about Dr. King and his presence, which I think a lot of us feel on a regular basis. And so, with no further ado, I want to bring in one of my co-hosts, John Mons. John, thanks for being here. Welcome to the broadcast.
Hey, Dan, how are you? Glad to be here.
Good. So, let's talk a little bit about the fact you and I are of an age. We were alive when Dr. King was still alive, but we were children.
Yeah.
Didn't really have a chance to sort of understand the activism. But in the immediate aftermath, I can remember for me in the early 70s, so much talk about Dr. King that even as a kid, I was like, tell me more about this man. Do you recall as a child people talking about Dr. King in your household or in your life?
Uh, it was more, I'd say, in my teenage years as I grew up. But in a lot of households, in my family, his picture would be on the wall, nearby Jesus and JFK. That was very common to see.
Interesting. And, it is, I had that same thing growing up with a lot of my friends who I would go over to their house and they had a picture of Dr. King up on the wall. And, in talking to people about that, later on, they would often say, this was, a lot of people will say, oh, I remember where I was when I heard that Kennedy was killed. They say, oh, I remember when we heard that Dr. King was killed. And there's a fascinating story for me out of Boston about that day that James Brown was playing a concert in Boston the day that the news came. And he specifically at his concert said, look, there's going to be a lot of people who want to be violent right now. There's going to be a lot of people who want to go out and protest and destroy things. And it's important that we remember who Dr. King was and what would he want us to do at this point in time. And I thought that was, a really strong thing. They still talk about in sort of Boston history because Boston had a very different reaction than a lot of places where things got really violent. So I want to thank you for being here. You are based in Atlanta. Still, I know Alabama says they're the heart of the South, but I still think Atlanta is really the heart of the South. And so, in many ways, you are seeing sort of a change in what's happening. Georgia has been a red state for a long time. It's sort of becoming very changed right now. And you see a lot of people. Do you see sort of residue of Dr. King's influence in some of this change that's happening right now? Do you think that that's an impactful thing that's happening?
Well, I think, in certain areas around the country, there's a lot of activism. And, I think that, comes out of what people learned from the civil rights movement, and how if you come together, if there's issues that you face, disagreements or things that you want to make better, come together, get out in the streets. There's been a lot of protesting in the streets. It's a formula that's been used in the past, and I think people are going back to that.
I couldn't agree with you more. So let me bring in one of my other co-hosts, Ricky Harrington. So Ricky, you thanks so much for joining us. Not being quite as famous as John Mons. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself? You're muted. I think you muted yourself. My autobiography is going to be Dan, you're muted. It's going to be a book with blank pages on the inside.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Well, I'm a missionary, clergyman by trade. I ran for office during the 2020 election for Senate against Senator Tom Cotton. We got about 33% of the vote. And here I am continuing on the fight for liberty and justice.
And it's a fascinating thing because it should be pointed out that Arkansas has never elected an African American to Senate, and your opponent Tom Cotton had called for some pretty radical things. He opposed the teachings of the 1619 Project, which essentially, there's some controversy about what's in the 1619 Project, but I will say that my take on it is that the summary of it says the wealth in the North was built on the poverty on the back of slavery in the South. So for you as a missionary, Ricky, somebody as a preacher, how much does it mean to you that you look at Dr. King and you say, I see that. I see the preacher there.
Well, I've always found it to be interesting on Martin Luther King Day that sometimes we neglect that he was a man of faith, that it was his faith in Jesus Christ, and taking a look at other people who say they believe in Jesus Christ and see the treatment of their fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, particularly the relationship between white Christians and black Christians in America. And I believe that propelled him, just my, speculation, extrapolation of looking at history and the things that he said that prompted him to get involved and to try to make that difference and wake people up who call themselves to be Christians. But, as it says in First John, you can't say you love God whom you don't see and hate your brother whom you do see.
It's a great quote. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. So let me bring in some other members for our panel. So we're going to have two panels today, a first half and a second half. And the people who are going to be joining us for our first half, first of all, Vince Burchett. Vince, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, how you doing? My name is Vince Burchett. I am in Virginia, Spotsylvania, Virginia to be exact. I advocate around these parts for voter advocacy, getting people registered to vote who have never been registered to vote, getting people information to vote, letting them know where they can go to vote, et cetera, et cetera. That's about my mission right now. I'm also a part of the NAACP here, which is making a big impact. Something very I call violent just happened to us in Virginia is that we had a governor's race in which a governor won by pretty much flashpointing something that you mentioned earlier, Mr. Dan, which was the CRT curriculum. And I watched in horror as he did all these things to incite racial divide between us to get votes, and it worked, unfortunately. So right now we have a big fight ahead of us, trying to protect public school education. They wish to dismantle it, and all those things that go along with it. So that's me in a wrap. Happy to be here.
It's awesome. I'm going to bring on Chris Lodge, but I have to throw in my first Dr. King quote for the day, which is that intelligence plus character is the goal of true education.
Mm.
Chris Lodge, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, when you introduce me that way, I almost think I have to look behind myself. You're talking about somebody else. I thank you for welcoming me to this discussion. My name is Christopher Noah Lodge. I graduated from Morehouse College. Went to Georgia Tech. I'm at a point where in my life where I'm not living for myself. I'm living for other individuals. And freedom and liberty means so much to me. And what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was trying to put out to the world, I saw the progression from one state to the ending state. And where he ended up, it was something that was so dynamic in the world that people saw forth to take out his life. And I'm taking that torch where he left off at that point and taking it further. And I think all the people on this panel are doing the same. And if we start from there, I think we will get far.
That is a great way to put it. Thank you very much. We got one more person in our first panel, Aaron Shafer. Aaron, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me out, Dan.
It's always a pleasure. For people who don't know that much about you, you want to give us a quick little bit of your background?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Aaron. On the internet, I go by Armed Atlas. I have a podcast called Costly Conversations, and we talk about things that matter to me. But most importantly, in the conversations that we have, we try to always touch on freedom, liberty, firearms, and family. Those are things that are so important to me, and I think are important to everybody here. And really, we want to touch on things that are difficult, things that maybe we would like to talk about, but don't really get talked about, don't get attention from the media, such as, all the big talking heads. So we just want to be honest and have really deep conversations about things that we genuinely care about, things that will actually change the world as we know it.
I think you muted Mr. Fishman.
Yeah.
Can't hear you, Dan.
You're saying you got a lot to say too. I can see it.
Exactly. My whole, like I said, my autobiography is going to be Dan, you're muted. But my goal for this panel is for it to be like that. Me shut up, listen, learn. You guys talk. Bring the wisdom, bring the stories that I don't know, bring the impactful things about Dr. King that our audience needs to hear. And so, I'm going to go off and I'm going to lean on John and Ricky as guys to sort of like facilitate and moderate the conversation. So I'm going to throw it to you first, Ricky, and then I'll come to John for a question after that. But what's one of the things that, like, if you were going to have a conversation at some point in time and you're talking about Dr. King, what's the most likely topic that it's going to be about? And I'll just let everybody in the panel comment on that afterwards.
We're going to talk about his economic policy that he leaned heavily into during the later years of his life. And whenever he started the Poor People's Campaign and was very vocal against the Vietnam War, the anti-war stance and the economic freedom and self-ownership, I'd love to talk to him about that. And furthermore, one of my favorite speeches by Dr. King is the mountaintop speech. I don't know if the Lord had let him know that his time was coming, but he said a lot of things, and he had a overarching theme during that speech, and that was, we gonna press on. We done been through all kinds of things. They done sick the dogs on us. They done hit us with the fire hose, and Dr. King joked around and said, hey, we Baptists, we've been baptized. Hey, some of y'all Methodists, y'all done been sprinkled. It ain't nothing but a little water, but you're not going to stop us. And that one thing is what we need right now. We need that same intensity that we not going to stop until we have what you promise us.
I see Chris and Vince nodding along there. Guys, chime in. What are you thinking?
I can definitely agree. I think looking at the whole progression of his life, towards the end, he said, I'm afraid I led my people into a burning house. With that said, some of the last things he did was on economics. When you start to mess with somebody's money, people listen. And so with that said, when he started to get into boycotts, when he started to get into galvanizing people and understanding that there's power in just a moment in people just saying we aren't going to do this and it affects somebody's profits, he became a threat. And when he became a threat, when he understood that particular thing, then, the powers that be said we have to get rid of him. And I think the most important thing for change is definitely delving into the economics of different positions that people may have. So when he went into that point, I understood right then he was understanding fully what he could do. I mean, before it was something he was like, he was doing it, but when he he delved into economics and put into the nonviolent kind of standpoint. He became so powerful, everybody knew it. And at that point in time, the powers that be said he had to be eradicated.
Yes, sir.
So I agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. His economic stances were very powerful, and I would like to say, like, he his life was taken away on the eve of the march for economic prosperity, for the poor men, for the trash people, for those people trying to rise up and recognize their economic ability that they had. That's when he made those powers that be really mad. And furthermore, his economic stance was the preservation of people, helping your brother, helping having these systems in place, public education, social welfare programs, things to help your fellow man become the greatest they can be. So I'm really a fan of his economic policies. I think a lot of people misunderstand them today and don't realize how much of a opposite. He actually spoke against capitalism. A lot of times, saying unchecked capitalism led to slavery and a lot of other things that are built on the blacks and black people. So it kind of makes me mad when I see a lot of people who don't have these ideals quote Martin Luther King. It infuriates me. It really does.
Yeah, I just have to. I know I said I was going to shut up, but I agree with you all the time when I see Dr. King's quotes taken out of context and say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm going to use this to justify whatever," and it's an insult to the man who was more than a man. He was the movement. Now, one of the things you got, yeah, please, John.
Let me jump in 1 second, since we were talking a little bit about economics. And I think, part of his I Have a Dream speech that people don't concentrate on is when he talked about America writing a bad check, basically to black folks, saying that we've had all these promises have been made. He talked about a promissory note, whether it's back to the Declaration of Independence or the Emancipation Proclamation. And he called America to task. And I think that was an inspiration to African Americans in the country at the time, saying, hey, we've had all these promises made and this talk about freedom and justice and equality. And, the country hasn't lived up to that, so it's partly economics also in the political realm, because that's where, a lot of these injustices come from. It's what the government is doing and the authority that they use over the people that were causing many of the problems that African Americans have faced in this country, for hundreds of years.
One of my favorite quotes by Martin Luther King is "Give us the ballot," and it was a speech he made. I can quote some things from it. It says, "Give us the ballot, and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot, and we will no longer plead to the federal government for the passage of anti-lynching laws. Give us the ballot, and we will fill our legislative halls with men of goodwill. Give us the ballot, and we will place judges on the benches of the South, and who will justly with love and mercy." The big thing just happened with our voting rights bill that we're trying to get passed. We're trying to do exactly that and give people the ballot, because when it's a problem when a loud minority rules, they tend to get things wrong and only do things to benefit themselves. If you all are listening out there, contact your Congress people and tell them to vote yes for this voting rights bill to help us save democracy.
Well, Dan,
I
let
totally
me
agree
okay.
with what you're saying, and I think it rained home more so when Malcolm X says the ballot or the bullet.
Yeah.
It rains home. In the end, when you look at the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, they started to agree on things so
Yes.
wholeheartedly. And you have to think about, why were they agreeing at this particular point in time? What was happening? Sometimes I think that Martin Luther King was put in a place where he didn't understand where he was, and people were manipulating him for certain agendas. And Malcolm X was just full throttle telling you this is what it is. And it was so much that people couldn't really relate to it because it's too much.
They couldn't
But
take
it's
it
the
all in.
truth.
Yeah.
It was actually the truth. So yeah, I agree with you, brother. The battle of the bullet.
You know, one aspect of that that I would like to discuss on the political level is not only having the ability to vote, but when we talk about ballot access, it's who can we vote for? You know, being with the largest third party in the country, Libertarian Party, you know, many of our battles across the country is just getting on the ballot to offer the people another option. Because I think a lot of people are frustrated, upset, and with the other major parties, but those parties have used that authority to keep others off the ballot. And I think King would be upset that, you know, just having the right to vote is not enough. I'm sure he would fight not only for that right, but for others, you know, to be placed on the ballot to give us better choices.
I
I
agree
just
with you, Mr. Mounds. And it's one thing you talk about a viable third party. The Libertarian Party has attractive aspects of it, but I do believe the Libertarian Party needs to clean house. There are way too many people in this party who are opposed to the very things that we are talking about. I don't know if you want to call them pipeliners. I don't know if you want to call them Trumpers or whatever like that, but they are in your party and they are making a fiasco of it and throwing name on the name, salt on the name of liberty. And it's really disheartening because we do need a third viable option. The Democrats and Republicans have their time, but until this party cleans shop and offer viable candidates, it's just going to be that a third party.
I
I
just
agree with you on
I
that.
made those comments, you know, just to not promote the Libertarian Party, but to just
Understand?
realize, you know, what the situation is today. So, you know, we can definitely move on and talk a little bit about, you know, other aspects like Dan had mentioned before about the man. And I think one of those, of course, being from Morehouse College, people may not understand how young Martin Luther King was when he went to college, how he was not an A student. You know, he was an average student. I think, you know, a lot of times people don't realize that. You know, I think kids ought to, you know, at least uh, know a little bit about that, because sometimes they think, well, you have to be, uh, great eloquent speaker to make a difference. And you know, I think he just took his abilities and with help and mentorship, you know, he just went out there in the world and made his way and made a difference.
I just want to say one thing. You know, we're taking the time to remember Dr. Martin Luther King, but I know for a fact he was not able to accomplish all that he did without other brothers and sisters standing right beside him, marching along, protesting, and doing those things. And I hope that there might be a renaissance now amongst the young people, and we start working together and we hold the line on these issues that we're fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the best ways to honor his memory.
It's
Aaron, go ahead. We want to hear from Aaron, man. I
I
know he's
appreciate
just sitting
it.
back, you know, quiet.
No, I'm
Jump
just
on in. What's on your mind?
I'm honored to be here. I'm soaking it all in. No, but I was actually just thinking, it's like, man, as men in this society and in our cultures and the circles of influence that we touch, we do need to very much encourage other men, other black men, other men in our society to use their voices and to use their powers for good. Because so often you see guys who, you know, they have a lot to say, but they refuse to actually stand up and say it, whether they're scared or they just don't feel like they actually have something to say, or maybe they don't know how to use and leverage today's technologies to reach others with their voice. there is so much that can be said and so much that can be done and so much change that can occur today. I had an interview with Larry Sharp, who, he's running for governor up in New York, and it was awesome. And we had an opportunity to share it with the audience. And so many people said, oh my gosh, like, I really didn't realize that the Libertarian Party, or what, not specifically the Libertarian Party, but I didn't really realize there were other options. And to me, that's so powerful, even though maybe we didn't reach as many people as we wanted to with his conversation. Just the impact of, even if 5 people found out, hey, there are other options out there. We don't have to feel like we're stuck in a binary left and right situation. We can dream, we can hope. And that's something that Martin Luther King really, really emphasized. Dr. Martin Luther King, he emphasized hope. So often he emphasized hope.
You're absolutely right, brother. And the story, and I'm not trying to do a plug or anything like that, but for the Libertarian Party, and I've been a part of it for about a year, and everything that I become a part of, I want to understand it, so I go really deep into it. My dialogue or storyline for the Libertarian Party was always from a third party and never from somebody in the Libertarian Party. And so my frat brother, John Munns, actually told me about it, and I started to go deeper into it. And the one thing that I got out of it, it was a word. It was just a word. And that was freedom. Freedom, freedom, freedom. In every aspect of the word. One of my great mentors who transitioned was Dr. John Henry Clark. He told me that everything that you delve into, everything that you're a part of, if it's not a part of your freedom from everything, you should throw it into the ash cans of history. When I started hearing that resounding word of freedom in the Libertarian Party, I was like, wow, that's what I believe in. And when I heard some of the speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. towards the end, it was definitely about freedom and leveraging the freedom to do this and that. And when I understood that, it was like, wow, it's about unifying, it's about galvanizing, and it's about a common cause and going towards freedom. And so with that said, not trying to do a plug, of course, when I joined the Libertarian Party, it's like, wow, these are like-minded people. They come from many demographics. And, I want to do something about it. So I decided, this year, I was actually going to, do a state rep, and I'm actually going to start to change the system from within. You know what I mean? And I'm doing that in the sense of today, and of all days of celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is I do something to promote my freedom. And today I promoted myself to say, hey, all right, I've decided to run for state representative position. I want to make a change. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Because I don't like politics at all, but I think the torch needs to be taken up. I think we need to galvanize. We need to come to a common cause. And, that's something I dedicated today to research and to actually make a change. Not necessarily say what's wrong with the system, but to actually try and change it.
That is a wonderful thing to say. We got 3 minutes left for this panel. I'm going to throw this quote up, and you guys tell me what you think about it. One of my favorite Dr. King quotes.
You have to go get it. You don't be upset about the results that you don't achieve when you don't put in the work.
Right. He, people look at him for his non-violent stance, his tactic. But, I say, he was a fighter. He fought against injustice. He fought against poverty. So, make the change that you want.
That is awesome. Guys, thank you very much for the first panel. Aaron, Christopher, Vince, you guys killed it. I want you guys on again. We're going to do more shows like this. fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Vince, I want to have a longer conversation with you at some point in time, because I think that, you raised some amazing points that I think in a different context, I would like to talk about the liberty movement and what it means. Because you're right. There does have to be some house cleaning going on. On the other hand, once we get swept up, there's some good hardwood floors in this place.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, thank you guys very much.
Yeah, never enough time.
Amen.
Yep. And so that was pretty awesome. First panel was amazing. Now, our second group, and I just want to briefly talk about the fact you guys killed that. That's exactly the way it should work, because I got smarter while y'all were all talking. So I want to see that same thing happen in this cycle. So let me start off and introduce some of the people who are in our second panel. Second panel, first person is Nina Welder. Nina, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yep. And tell us just a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I'm really excited. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody in the first panel because I learned some things too. So that's really fantastic. I live in the metro Atlanta area of Georgia. I am currently, I'm the statewide political director for Georgia Young Republicans, and I own or operate an armory located in Peachtree City, Georgia.
Outstanding. All right. Our next guest is Jay Holloman. Jay, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hello, guys. Jay Holloman here. My background's really centered around leadership. And then recently here in the last few years, I've started to get more politically in depth with what's going on in our country and our communities. And so I'm excited to be here and try to see how we can push things forward.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Next, Black Mutualist. I don't have my sheet in front of me, so I can't tell people what your name is, but that's what's great about this time slot. Please tell people what your name is.
My name is, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay, great. Yeah, my name is Ramon. I guess I got involved in the liberty movement around 2019. I consider myself to be an anarchist ideologically. No, I'm just here to, fellowship with my fellow people here about MLK, and happy to do so.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And we have one more guest who's trying to get in. We are stuck at the limit. We're only allowed to have 10 people in the room, and backstage, I still have Christopher, Vince, and Aaron's gone already. So everybody else gets to stay. That's awesome. So we got another guest coming in any minute now, but for right now, let's start off this conversation. And since you guys were here listening to the last thing about it, tell me, what did you guys think about it? You guys who are in the green room. I mean, one of the things that always happens on the best talk shows is that the people in the green room are like, I got something to add to that. So what do you have to add to what we were saying beforehand?
Well, I'll go first. I was super excited to see my quote featured. That was the quote I had jotted down when I was prepping for this regarding oppressors. Martin Luther King's quote regarding freedom. So I was very excited to see that come up. So that made me super happy. I felt like that meant we were of one mind, at least particularly on that subject.
That's great. For me, one of the things that was most interesting too is that, we have a sort of diversity here in that, we're all coming from somewhat different backgrounds. And now, as we sit here and we talk about Dr. King, we're talking about a unifying man, a unifying force, somebody who brought people together. And I'm wondering if, you guys have thoughts, memories from your childhood, ever getting together and doing something to honor Dr. King, celebrating Martin Luther King Day in the past that was a good memory, something happy to talk about.
I'll take that one on. So someone who has roots in the South, my grandparents are from a little town called LaGrange, Georgia, in South Georgia. I remember growing up sitting with my both grandparents and great grandparents talking about the lineage of Dr. King and what that meant for us. I came from one of those households where there was a picture of Dr. King, JFK, and then Jesus. It's literally a thing for us. So just about some of the struggles specifically in the South. Excuse me, and interesting enough, how those struggles have impacted my family personally. Members of my family ended up relocating out of the South just because of some of the struggles that we've had growing up in the past and how that's impacted us. And now having family on both the East and West Coast, that was a direct correlation with the struggles that Dr. King had and how my family tried to figure out ways to make it through the Jim Crow era and some of the things that he stood up and fought for. And it's interesting how now looking back, I can see how all of that's impacted us and what it's done for African Americans, but not us, but just in particular, what it's done for everyone who was really trying to get together and fight for a common cause.
He's muted.
Wait, am I muted?
Dan muted himself again.
Classic. That is the classic thing. However, I didn't have a phone going off in the background, so I win that one. Jeremy, welcome. Come in. You and I actually spent more time physically together than me and anybody else in this room. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a memory or some statement of impact about how Dr. King has impacted your life?
100%. I would say, well, actually, let me not answer the question first. I'm Jeremy. I run a company called Little Liberty, which is a small financial consultancy out here in Boston. Heavily involved in just local politics as well as some national stuff. Dan's one of my best friends. So I would say as far as Dr. King has influenced my life, he's giving me positive Black leadership to strive towards, positive examples of what Black leadership looks like, and just a kind of a blueprint for how our activists and leadership should kind of act. I guess something that was like super impactful for me from his legacy was essentially known in our community in Birmingham, Alabama as like D-Day, where a whole bunch of kids kind of got together and protested racial injustice in their community, and were kind of galvanized to kind of follow Dr. King in the footsteps of Dr. King and protest that police brutality going on, and a whole bunch of other things, ranging from segregation, a whole bunch of other stuff happening in their community, and just, yeah, I would say the Birmingham incident.
That's great. And at this point in time, I want to open it up. You guys want to talk about things, feel free to jump in, bring in issues, crosstalk. I'm going to throw in one of my other favorite quotes and just throw it open to you guys, and I'm taking myself out of the conversation. A right delayed is a right denied. One of my favorite quotes. Tell me, what do you guys think about that? And then just feel free to riff on.
Who wants to kick off? Well, I think once again, the legacy of King is action. So when you face problems anywhere, especially on a level such as the national level, that if you want to make change, you have to galvanize and get people to act. And you look at his book, Why We Can't Wait, and the fact that hey, a lot of these things that have been fought for, rights, and it's taken hundreds of years, and there's always folks that's going to say you're doing too much, or you're doing it the wrong way, or that's going to hurt the cause. That I think King had his own program and thought it was the best way to go, but he didn't wait on other folks to do something. He was out there in the streets. I think that's one of his greatest legacies.
I'm glad you said that. One thing I learned about Dr. King in preparation for today is I went and watched his last interview that was recorded before he was assassinated. Before that, he had turned sort of on his I Have a Dream speech, and he said that his dream had become a nightmare. He was a big proponent of direct action. Speaking of action, one of his big problems was getting people to stop being so apathetic and to combat this issue. And one of the big issues that he had in doing that is that just like today, actually, there were implicit forms of racism and there were explicit forms of racism. In the South, there was explicit forms of racism in the form of people like Bull Connor, and then other, people that were in the South within power that were using such power to oppress Black people. It was a very easy target because you could look at a person, you could look at a law, you could look at the segregation laws, you could look at the person, and you could say, this is where the hatred, this is where my oppression is coming from. He said he had the most problem with implicit racism and implicit oppression in places like the North, where there was no legalized segregation. There was no big, bad racist figure such as a Bull Connor. And even today, especially as Black libertarians, we find problems waking, just like Dr. King said, waking people up to the full totality of oppression that is rendered upon us for our culture and the color of our skin. People don't want to, they only want to see the explicit. And if you try to show them the implicit, things like laws being applied differently to people of color, things like people of color going to jail for longer sentences than their white counterparts or otherwise. When you try to show them these things, and even things that might not even show up on a stat sheet all that well, because we know that, for crimes and oppression against people of color, the state and the record keepers of the state have not been the best stewards of that data, nor have they been the people that have cared about that data. So it's very interesting to me that Dr. King was fighting against waking people up to the realities and to the need to take direct action against oppression. And we're still fighting that battle today, trying to get people, specifically, our Black counterparts and our white counterparts, to rise up and take action against these things.
When I was campaigning for the U.S. Senate, there was a candidate running for the 4th Congressional District, and it was an NAACP candidate meet and greet that I was attending. And this candidate, he was a law professor, older Black gentleman, and he stated that, racism in America is not an issue for Black Americans to deal with. It's an issue for white Americans to deal with. And I just thought that was very, very, it just kind of blew my mind a little bit because, here I am, Black man. I experience everything through the way, you treat yourself and the way others treat you, the way people that are not even your countrymen will treat you because of this huge system that has been going on for centuries. And that, obviously, we just have to speak the truth and straightforward. Most of the population is Caucasian. Black people were property during those times. And it's taken us a long time to get rid of these things that are deeply built in all of us. It don't matter what our race is. This whole system is within our subconscious, and the way that we deal with one another, the way that we deal with businesses. And it's something that we have to take a deep look within ourselves as people of this country if we want to fix it. We have to deal with the main issue. And if there's somebody else, whether you agree with them or not, if their rights are on the line, that means that sometime sooner or later, your rights might be on the line as well. So we have to defend every single person's right in this country if we're going to have any type of freedom.
Now, Nina, I'm going to guess that you're going to have a slightly different thing, because on the one hand, it's one thing for a lot of men to talk about the fact that, we have these rights that are oppressed and stuff like that. You have the double whammy. So talk about what it's like for you. I mean, in the context of, Dr. King, one of the things that was really important to him when he talked about was sort of the fact that the movement has to be really broad. And, here you are now, you are, and just to be clear too, it's not all libertarians here. As you mentioned, she's a Republican. We had a Democrat in the last panel. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel like the movement needs from you? How Dr. King memory, Dr. King's day is an opportunity for you to change things.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a Republican that hangs out in what they call the liberty wing of the party. So I'm very sympathetic to libertarian and libertarian causes. And Dr. King spends plenty of time discussing the ideas of freedom and liberty and how those really need to apply, as the gentleman just mentioned, to people that either they don't look like you or ideologically they're not the same as you, particularly when we're talking about women, we're talking about minorities, people who are economically depressed. So I think that it's a great opportunity. And what the movement needs is, I'm careful to use the term inclusion because sometimes inclusion translates to watering down, but the movement definitely needs this idea that there is a place and that there is value and that we need to be moving in the same direction, right? Because if one person's rights are being oppressed or withheld, then we are all worse for it. So I'm really excited, like I said, to be here on the panel and to hear from the gentleman earlier today, both in this panel and in the earlier panel, and their thoughts of how we can move in that direction. How do we include people and activate them? Because that's really what it matters, right? How do we get people to get out there and take an active role in improving our communities?
That sounds like a challenge thrown up to you guys. Dr. King was amazing at including everybody. How do you guys think we become more inclusive? Because it's not a political thing that we're talking about. It's a human thing.
It's two different ways to attack it. In mutualism, it's known as dual power. One, a cultural attack, so to speak, one an effect or a movement where you're trying to affect the culture, and then another where you're also trying to affect the state and its systems, because the government, the United States, is very complicit in the oppression that Black people have faced. One thing Dr. King talked about in order to make it so that there's more inclusion and there's more movement, there's more traction to the movement, is he spoke about income inequality. He spoke about how when Black people were freed, they were not offered a single parcel of land or a single dollar. Yet when white immigrants came over to the United States, they were offered land, money, resources that Black people were simply kept out of. They were made to be a lower class by the state. So one thing that we can do is we can look at the inequalities, particularly like going along with Dr. King said, the income inequality, the living inequality, and the voting inequality that Black people today have. Especially when we have a system like we have today, where the voting system and politics in general, the thing that it's, quote unquote, given to us to have a voice, is ran by money.
Jeremy, I thought you have something to say there, but you're muted.
Well, I'll jump in right quick and until Jeremy hops on. When you talk about activism, I see it, in the term, find your lane. Now, many of us come from different backgrounds and we're choosing different avenues to get toward the same place when we talk about freedom and liberty. And for anybody out there that is trying, to increase the amount of freedom we have in this country or around the world, I would say find your lane. It might not be in the political realm. Some of us have delved into that, but it might just be on the community level. It might be, doing co-ops or, homeschooling. There's a lot of ways for people to, to increase the amount of freedom they have.
I'd like to add something. We sell ourselves short a lot of times. We don't know what we can do until we actually go out there and do it. And if we fail in the process, that's just a learning experience. That is gold for you. When you fall down, consider that to be pure treasure. And I think, for us right now, aside from getting organized, we need to have, measurable goals. We need to have a goal 1, goal 2, and, one 1-1 or 1-2 before we get to 2. We have to, start networking one another, which I'd love to do with the people that are on this panel, so that we can really start building some things again. And I think, for the past 30, 40 years, we've made some improvements, and we continue to make improvements, but we still have a long way to go. And we need a good old dose of that perseverance.
Well, Jeremy's back.
He's muted.
Jeremy, unmute. Say what you were going to say.
Yeah.
There you go. All right.
But I didn't want to say I think honestly the strongest thing for communities to do to fight back against, at least our community, to fight back against what is essentially anti-Blackness, is leadership development. I think far too often we as activists kind of carry the torch, and don't leave many embers left for the younger generations to kind of rekindle that flame. I think we have a really big problem with generational movement. You can see it between the dichotomy today between the old Black Panther Party and the new Black Panther Party, right? I mean, we see these things all the time. And I think that is one of King's legacies, just to be quite frank, was someone who did it very effectively. Again, I do point back to the sort of what we call was learned in history books today as the Birmingham riots. But there's nothing more inspiring than seeing kids kind of take up the torch because their parents are scared of losing their jobs to fight against it in the fight against racism, right? To see kids who leave school, to go out and protest what is essentially some of the most, what one can argue is one of the most anti-Black eras of this country. It's just inspiring, and I think we need to learn from that legacy, and again keep things moving forward, because the reality is none of us live forever, and therefore movements don't live forever unless we keep developing those beneath us, unless we keep telling those, or at least taking people underneath our wing, and then kind of pushing them forward. Something I see a lot is a lot of gatekeeping, and I think we need to move past this era of popularity or activism for popularity, and just focus it on what it is necessarily pushing movements forward.
I see you nodding there, Nina.
I love it. I love what Jeremy's saying. I mean, I think he is spot on, particularly regarding gatekeeping. So it's time that some of us activists help cultivate as well some of those underneath us and on both sides of us, so we can get the mission done. So yeah, I'm loving all of that.
I wanted to say something just right quick. I promise I won't talk about cats. We're talking about racial injustice in this country, and we do have other brothers and sisters that don't have the same complexion that we do. And in saying that, in having these conversations, I don't want anyone that happens to be white to feel guilty about some of the things that, I went through or some other people that went through. But if you're actively doing those things, you should feel something if you're a human being with a smidgen of conscience. I thought about whenever I was in China, I was teaching my students English. And at that time, it was the height of some anti-Japanese propaganda in China. They were having some real big international issues. And so I would ask my students in my class, because they were fighting about World War II and some of the atrocities that were committed. And I asked them if they had any relatives that were murdered or, bayoneted. They bayoneted pregnant women there during World War II, or just any of those horrible things that people do to one another in war. And no one ever said, that, yeah, my uncle. And I had thousands of students. And I told them about my grandmother's brother that was lynched. And I talked about my own, experience whenever I was threatened with lynching by 3 older white men in Marshall, Texas. And I said to them, I do not blame every single white person for the mistakes of those 3 men. It's their fault. Every time I encounter someone that happens to be Caucasian, I don't, suspect whether they're racist or not. And I think that, this is kind of like there's this little unacknowledged tension that we are having. And I believe that we need to acknowledge that tension. I don't blame you for what somebody else has done. But whenever we are talking about this thing and we need to fix it, I need your help. I don't need you to stand on the sideline, and I don't need you to feel guilty for yourself. I need your help.
I'd like to throw a quick quote from King in right quick. It says, "The hope of a secure and livable world lies with disciplined nonconformists who are dedicated to justice, peace, and brotherhood." And as an activist, you have people that go along to get along. They take the popular stances. But that's another thing that we can learn from King is taking unpopular stances. On one issue, he had the civil rights movement that he fought for, and he had people that were against that. And, we can understand why. But later in life, when he spoke out against the Vietnam War, that was a huge change. And it was a huge risk because a lot of his supporters turned on him. And they didn't think that was appropriate, made it look like he was really coming down on the entire country or something like that. But he was a non-conformist, and that's one of the things that I like about it.
That's awesome. And it really brings us to a great spot. We're going to say goodbye to Jeremy and Ramon and Nina. Guys, thank you so much for being on our panel. You guys really contributed a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. Let me get back down to our core here. So, guys, I think it did a pretty good job of shutting up and listening. Ricky, I appreciate, what you were talking about there. And John, when we're talking about Dr. King in Vietnam, I'm brought to mind too, how controversial that was. But in many ways, there was a lot of leadership in the African-American community against the war. I mean, I remember, at the time, Cassius Clay, now Muhammad Ali, talking about why he wasn't going to be drafted, and Dr. King talking about the war and, how incredible that was. But that wasn't just for African Americans, right? That was exactly for everybody. That was a unity of purpose thing. And so let's close up with sort of our last things on this. What about Dr. King? What are the things about him that you think it's universal? It's for everybody in the world. Anything leap out at you, Ricky? I mean, you talked about being in China and talking about your experiences there. Anything, and then, I recognize I'm putting you guys on the spot here a little bit, but, maybe the last thing I want to talk about a little bit is I think we're all old enough to remember when Martin Luther King Day wasn't a federal holiday. And in fact, until very recently in Virginia, they decided to have it be both Robert E. Lee Day and Martin Luther King Day, because that was sort of their compromise of how they were going to preserve Southern culture. But finally, everywhere, and Hollywood points out also, and Stonewall Jackson Day. Why?
Well, let me say that. Let me say this. I think his appeal, a lot of his appeal, is the universality of his message. When he talks about a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So it's not just about our local communities. It's not just about our states that we live in. It's not just about the United States. It's about the world and making the world a better place. And he talked about love and caring. And I think that, was, probably his biggest message. And it was very universal.
Yes, definitely preaching about compassion toward your fellow human being and an absolute respect for the dignity of every human being, and working toward eradicating poverty. Those are issues that deal with the human condition, especially with greed and how our greed leads us to treat other human beings like they're objects, that we can do whatever we want to do with them. And that message of human dignity it's universal. It should reach all of us, no matter who we are, no matter what language we speak, no matter what color or political philosophy. Respecting human beings because they are human beings is probably one of the purest messages.
I couldn't agree more. And, to sum it up, that's our way that we want to exit, to say that everything about it is just having respect for your fellow human being. I mean, almost the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. That basic level of respect for humanity, I think that's a great thing to close on. Thank you guys so much for a great Martin Luther King Day broadcast. And we talked about some really important stuff. And I can tell you, looking at our numbers, lots of people watched this. I am really excited that this message is going to was seen by so many people live, and that means it's going to be seen by thousands of people more. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Ricky Harrington. Thank you very much, John Mons. My name is Dan Fishman. I am the Executive Director of People for Liberty. You can find out more about us at peopleforliberty.org. Ricky's written a blog for us. I'm going to start leaning on John Mons to get a blog in relatively soon. Sign up for our newsletter, and thank you all, and have a very good night.